Zipito by Jorge Argueta, translated by Elisa Amado, illustrated by Gloria Caldero. Rufina Perez was a pretty girl. Her large black eyes shone like two moons in the night of her face. When her hair blew in the wind, Rufina seemed to be dancing to the rhythm of the fields. Rufina Perez spoke Nahuatl and wore many colored petticoats. All the colors of the sun were reflected in the little pearly beads she wore, as though a rainbow were shining around her neck. Her small round feet sat under the straps of her sandals like two brown tamales. One morning Rufina and her mother were feeding the animals on the front patio of their house. Her mother said, "Rufina, now you are becoming a woman." She asked her daughter to sit beside her on the little bench in the shade of the tamarind tree. "Rufina," continued her mother, "you have heard us talk about the Zipito. I know that one of these mornings, when you go down to the river, you will see him, and so I have some things to tell you. Don't be afraid. The Zipito appears to all girls who are about to become women. He can tell, and the Zipito wants to be the very first boyfriend of every girl. He loves being in love, and besides loving us, he wants to give us advice. You will be amazed by the things he says." Rufina listened to her mother very quietly. "Here in the valley," her mother went on, "the Zipito has appeared to all of us, and he has given each of us a real fright. It's impossible not to be scared of him because of how he looks. But when you first see him, try not to be frightened and don't run away. It's better that way because a Zipito can be very stubborn, and it can be hard to get him to leave you in peace with his crazy notions about love. He isn't bad. He only wants to be loved because he's ugly and lonely. Some say that the poor thing lives on the banks of the river because he feels so sad about being the way he is. That's why he only comes out at dawn, so he can hide in the shadows." In the old days, people used to say that the Zipito was the son of a rich woman who lived around here. They said she was so rich that she buried her money in clay pots. But one day, bad guys heard this story and went to rob her. First, they looked for the money in the house, but they couldn't find it. Then they dug holes in the patio, but it wasn't there either. When the woman wouldn't tell them where she kept her money, the robber stole her little son and took him to a witch who cast an evil spell on him and turned him into a Zipito. Ever since, he's lived along the banks of the river. Rufina sat very still. She felt the warm breeze caress her and her mother's story wrap itself around her, though she found it all a bit frightening. "The Zipito," her mother went on, "looks like a child because he is small, but he is actually old. No one knows how old he really is, though some say he's even older than the stones of the river. He wears a pointy black hat with a wide brim, and he doesn't wear a shirt, so it's easy to see his shiny big belly, as smooth as the skin of a snake. But despite his tummy, when you look at him from the front, you think you're looking at his back because his feet are backward. And goodness me, his nails are so long and sharp as little knives. Now I laugh when I remember how he looks because he's going backward when he's going forward." "Well, my sweetie," said her mother as she threw corn to the pigs, hens, and ducks that were eating in the dust at their feet, "when the Zipito appears, don't be afraid." After that, Rufina often thought about what her mother had said, and each day that she went to the river to fetch water, she wondered if he might be there. One day Rufina Perez woke up, took her jug as usual, and went along the path to the river. Everything was dark and quiet. Rufina saw how the great morning stars hung in the sky and smiled. As she walked, her skirts brushed the drops of dew that were hanging like earrings from the pearls of the flowers and along the blades of grass. When she reached the river, Rufina put the jug on the sand and walked right to the edge. She bent over to touch the water with the tips of her fingers. Wading in, she crossed herself and began to say her prayers. Almighty God. Then she leaned over to wash her face. As she straightened up, Rufina could see a figure reflected in the ripples of water that trembled out in circles from where she stood. Sitting on the rock known as Big Face was a Zipito himself, just as her mother had described him. Rufina froze. She was very frightened. Good morning, little flower. Good morning, little bunny. Good morning, Rufinita. May the fields wish you good morning. May God give you a good morning, Rufinita Perez. I am the Zipito. Rufina heard him say her name in his rusty voice. She felt as though hairy caterpillars were walking all over her body, and she turned and ran out of the river in great strides that made the water splash, splash, splash. When the Zipito saw that Rufina was about to run away, he said desperately, No, no, Rufinita, don't go. Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. I know I'm short, and that I have a big belly, and that I'm ugly, but I'm not bad. Come back, Rufinita. And the Zipito sat on the rock and cried as Rufina ran away. Behind the hills, little threads of light were dancing up to the sky, and it looked as though the sun were growing out of the earth. Rufina did not stop running until she came to her mother. Her mother said, Oh, mijita, that bandit has come out. It's just the way you said, sobbed Rufina. Of course, said her mother, but as I told you, the Zipito is not really bad. Remember that every woman in this valley has seen him, and we are all fine, even though he certainly gave each of us a big fright. Later we thought it was funny. Look at Petrona. Today she claims that she was never the slightest bit afraid, although she was speechless for days after she saw him. And La Cande says she'd even like to see him again, although the first time she did, he gave her a fever. They went into the house. After Rufina had changed her clothes, she sat by the fire. What happened to you, mamita? Said Rufina. My cheeks swelled up, but don't worry, mija, because all this has happened to me too. I know exactly what to do. There's a secret. And with that, Rufina's mother leaned over and whispered so softly that only Rufina could hear. You know what else? Said her mother out loud. Right now, the Zipito is probably under the comal. He turns himself into flames so that he can be the one who heats your house and cooks your food. At night, when everyone is asleep and the fire has burned down, the Zipito eats the ashes. Then he stands in front of the house and opens his mouth wide. All the ashes he has eaten turn into little stones that fall out of his mouth. The Zipito throws them at the roof, but no one hears a thing. As the stones hit the tiles, they turn first into flowers, then into fireflies, after that fly off, glowing into the bushes. Only you can hear this, and only you can hear the Zipito's voice. Rufina sat quietly and watched as the flames burned softly around the comal. Time passed very slowly that day. The breeze carried the smells of guava, kumquat, cocoa bean, and ripe mango. Every now and then Rufina looked toward the river and thought about the 3 nights when her mother said she would hear the Zipito. I hope the time passes quickly, Rufina thought. She remembered what her mother said and she should do on the morning of the 4th night. That night, Rufina's mother sat on the edge of her bed until Rufina was sound asleep. When all was still and only night animals, the wind and the stars were awake, Rufina's ears awoke and heard the Zipito from within her deepest sleep, just as her mother had told her she would. The next morning, Rufina wasn't afraid any longer. She knew for herself that the Zipito was not bad and that beauty doesn't only come from beauty. At dawn on the fourth day, Rufina took a basket and went along to the river thinking about the secret her mother had told her. There, sitting on Big Face, was the Zipito. Good morning, angel, heart of the morning. Good morning, Rufinita, ray of sunshine, most precious stone. Only you know what I said last night, how I want to protect you and love you. The Zipito paused, and before he could go on, Rufina interrupted. If you love me so much, I want you to prove it to me. Whatever you want, said the Zipito. Well, said Rufina, I've never been to the sea, but I've been told that it is big as the sky and has salty water, whose murmurs are called waves. I want one of those waves just for me. That's why I've brought you this basket, so you can take it to the sea and bring it back to me. When the Zipito heard Rufina's request, he was so excited that he leapt off the rock to Rufina's side and, snatching up the basket, jumped from stone to stone down the river toward the sea. Rufina never saw the Zipito again, but when her own daughter did, Rufina knew exactly what to tell her.